I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
And we are two nerds who are here to make Shakespeare easier to understand.
In this podcast, we will explore as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which the plays were written, and how his plays are viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as theater makers, how his plays can be responsibly performed today, all while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to Bardolatry.
So, Shakespeare anyone?
Hi, listeners. Want to support Shakespeare Anyone? Visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. Now, onto the episode. Hi, Elyse.
Hi, Kourtney.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you?
I'm also doing pretty well. First and foremost, Elyse, happy opening to Never Fear Shakespeare at the B Street Theater.
Thank you so much. It has been a really fantastic process, and I'm so excited to share it with the world as we're recording. We're in the middle of previews right now, and so we've gotten our first audiences of students and teachers and families, and it is so cool to see these younger humans just be incredibly enchanted with Shakespeare.
Yeah, and listeners, if you did not get a chance to listen to the mini episode from last week, I highly recommend going and listening to Elyse and her co-playwright, Sean Patrick Nill, and their lead actor, M.L. Roberts, talk about this Shakespeare-adjacent production that Elyse co-wrote, influenced by the podcast, as well as her experience with theater for young audiences and family theater. And so please check that out. And again, congratulations, flowers to you, Elyse, for, by the time this episode comes out, opening your original play.
Thank you so much, Kourtney.
And now we have the final discussion episode of our Tempest series.
Yes.
So there's a lot of really exciting things happening for us this October, this fall. Elyse, what is that final episode for the Tempest that we're going to be talking about?
We are going to be talking about Prospero's magic. It has been a long time since we've discussed magic on this podcast. We last discussed it when we looked at Macbeth and how the magic of the witches works and was influenced by discussions around magic and specifically King James's takes on magic and the North Berwick witch trials.
Yeah, and the Book of Demonology.
Book of Demonology, and a lot of looks towards like how specifically women were thought of. Women
were perceived as
yes,
magical
Thank you.
people.
Yeah, magic for women. And Prospero's magic works a little bit differently than the witches in Macbeth. So we wanted to revisit magic and really sort of take a look at how does Prospero's magic work? Where does it come from? But first things first, we have a couple of housekeeping things. We have 2 new Patreon patrons to thank and welcome to the Patreon community. So thanks, and ever thanks to Meg Helms and Ina Carranza for your support of the podcast. It means so much to us, and all of our Patreon patrons help produce this podcast. And very fun community on Patreon with bonus content, behind the scenes, extra episodes, as well as more updates on the work that we're doing beyond the episodes of this podcast.
Yeah, beyond the pod.
Beyond and behind and all other directions.
Yes.
And then we also have a couple of very exciting announcements that we learned about this month a couple of weeks ago. We learned that we have been featured as a additional resource in the Stratford Festival's Macbeth Study Guide. Our Stuff to Chew On episode from Macbeth is listed alongside resources from the Globe and Folger Shakespeare Library as an additional resource on Shakespeare and Macbeth.
And Emma Smith. Yeah, as you described it online, we are in a Shakespeare sandwich with Emma Smith, Shakespeare's Globe, and Folger Shakespeare, which is We're sitting here. It's unreal that what we do in our bedroom recording studios is reaching these institutions. So
Yeah.
it's an honor to be a part of that list of Macbeth resources.
Yeah, so thank you to the Stratford Festival, and their production of Macbeth does continue through November. So if you're in the area, that is the Stratford Festival in Canada. We also have been cited as a reference in Performing Shakespeare on an Endangered Planet by Elizabeth Freestone and Catherine Steele Brokaw. It's a book that came out this summer that serves as a guide for making and studying ecological theater using Shakespeare's plays. And why is Shakespeare so well suited for addressing environmental crises? And our episode from A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare and Climate Change, where we also talked to theater maker and environmentalist Sydney Schwint, is featured in their book as, again, an additional resource for engaging more with that topic. So thanks to Elizabeth Freestone and Catherine Steele Brokaw.
Before we started recording, Elyse and I were saying that both of these references are things on our early Shakespeare Anyone vision board. You know, it'd be so cool for us to be an educational resource for theater makers, and it'd be really cool for us to be referenced in academic spaces as well.
Back in 2020, when we were dreaming up what this could be, starry-eyed visions of where this podcast could go. So thank you to the Stratford Festival and Elizabeth Freestone and Catherine Steele Brokaw for making our dreams come true.
Yeah, it's like magic.
And that's a great point. Way to tie it back. Now let's dive into the Tempest, Prospero's magic. So my reading comes from an article by Evelyn Tribble called A Strange, Hollow, and Confused Noise, Prospero's Start and Early Modern Magical Practices. And I want to give a special thank you to Evelyn Tribble for access to this article. This article looks at how Prospero's magic, and specifically the moment where he startles during the mask, is indicative of how his magic works and how it aligns with the early modern and medieval grimoire magic practices. So in case you have not listened to our episodes on Magic from Macbeth in a long time, early modern grimoires were sort of magical practice manuals that were handwritten and existed across early modern Europe during the late medieval and early modern period. They are manuscripts. They are in both vernacular, so like in England they would be in English, elsewhere in Europe they would be in Italian or French, for example, and they were also written in Latin. And these manuals, in contrast to King James's demonology, depict magic as, quote, an agnostic, demanding practice that required states of profound concentration and absorption, unquote. And in this article, Tribble argues that because Prospero's startled response when he all of a sudden remembers Caliban's plot and then the mask disappears, that is indicative of his magic being this sort of grimoire-based, requiring a lot of attention magic. Or for if there's anybody else out there who plays a lot of D&D, the spells they require concentration. Yes. They take up a concentration slot.
I love that.
Yeah.
The Tempest, like D&D style.
Yeah. That's the best sort of modern analogy I can make to these grimoires and how they depict magic working. They also describe a lot of contested relationships between the spirits that the user of the grimoire is trying to call. So not only do you require a lot of concentration, but then to call on spirits to do the magic, but the spirits themselves can be resistant to doing the magic.
Sounds like someone we know.
And Tribble, again, goes through one specific grimoire, which I have put in the chat for you, Kourtney, and I'll put in the episode description for our listeners if you want to take a look at what this looks like. This comes from the Folger Library's digital collections. So this is the Folger manuscript VB26. According to Tribble, it is a book of magic and spells that was written in both English and Latin. And the Folger Library has the work in 2 different volumes. 2 volumes, it's one big work. So this was handwritten multiple times and passed around early modern England, and it consists, quote, primarily of closely written secretary hand with minute attention to mise-en-page, comprising numbers, marginal notations, charms, spells, charts, catalogs of demons, extensive rubrications, and elaborate images of conjuring circles, emblems, and spirits, unquote. So this was also part of the sort of like magical practice, was compiling this type of book, like compiling knowledge, keeping a record of the knowledge. The sort of like mise en page that she describes is that there's a lot of attention paid to like what is depicted on each page to be of most use for the person trying to use this grimoire as a spell book.
I'm listening to Elyse, but also kind of like going through these pages, and they're really, really cool to look at.
Yes.
The detail that you're talking about, Elyse, like I know you're going to get into it, but like go look at it. It's so cool.
Yeah, I also like quickly paged through it. Thank you again to Evelyn Tribble for sending it to me. It's really, really cool. So that's the grimoire that we're going to be looking at and where these parallels are drawn from. Another thing that Tribble notes is that the idea of Prospero using a grimoire is in the text. We never see his book. He just talks about it. He talks about, I'm going to go drown my book. And he has to like go away to like do his art, his magic, with the exception of like his magic garment, right? We do not see any other details of how his magic works. We just kind of like know that there's something off stage that he has to do, except for the moments where he puts Miranda to sleep or stops Ferdinand from moving. There's some sort of magic that he's able to do with his arm or his staff, but some of the bigger stuff requires him to go off stage. And the book remains off stage persistently. Another feature of the grimoire practice is that grimoires are kept, this catalog of knowledge is kept secret, so Prospero keeping it off stage, keeping it hidden, being among his most prized possessions as described by Caliban, is in keeping with how a grimoire would have been kept. And for a little bit more about like what a grimoire was, Tribble quotes Owen Davies, who is a historian who's written a book, according to Tribble, quote, the most comprehensive treatment of the history of grimoires, unquote. And Owen Davies defines these broadly as, quote, books of conjurations and charms, providing instructions on how to make magical objects such as protective amulets and talismans. They are repositories of knowledge that arm people against evil spirits and witches, heal their illnesses, fulfill their sexual desires, divine and alter their destiny, and much else besides, unquote. And then he also adds that they are distinguished by having an emphasis on conjuring spirits, the power of words, and ritual involved in creating magical objects. And Tribble notes that based on the number of surviving grimoire manuscripts we currently have, it is likely that many hundreds would have been found across Europe and England during the early modern period. So this was an active practice. The manuscripts that existed were diverse. They are not all the same, so they do seem to be like more personalized collections of knowledge that is shared and gathered.
But it's not published.
Not published, right. They are all in manuscript form. Yes, and I'll get to that in a bit.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. Jumping ahead.
Great. I'm so glad you caught on to that. They also have a number of features in common. They are actually, across the board, religious in tone and invoke God as the true source of all power that these magicians wield. They are concerned with conjuring and, quote, display unquestioning faith in the power of words and images to call forth and control spirits, unquote. So all of their power to do this, though, comes from God. So they are asking God in every sort of ritual that is written out in these manuscripts across the board. It involves a lengthy invocation and ritual to get into the right mindset and prepare the magic user to engage with the magic and to call forth and be in the right mind space to call forth the spirit. And then to call forth the spirit, they invoke God. So it's not just about reciting spells. Tribble notes it is, quote, an embodied and extended process. Magic is an enormous amount of work, requiring not just extensive paraphernalia, but also prolonged spiritual and mental preparation, unquote.
That's interesting because when we studied witchcraft, witchcraft is dark magic that's controlled by, and they conjure up the devil.
Right. This is me talking out of nowhere, but something that we did talk about with the North Berwick witch trials was like the idea of sort of like a mysticism practice existing and the witch trials being a way to quash that sort of practice and the church gaining power. You know, saying that this other practice is the devil's work is a way to do that.
Yeah.
So what it looks like, the grimoires are preoccupied with this, like achieving a mental state where you can call forth spirits and call on spirits to do your bidding. these sorts of processes start with, they are termed work throughout the manuscript, and it starts with long and demanding prayers in English and Latin. And Tribble notes that, quote, this disrupts the black-white dichotomy that is often used to discuss magic, as we were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Practitioners of this art believed that such holy practices authorized and facilitated their interactions with spirits, even demonic agents. The prayer addressed to the most mighty Jehovah first implores the Lord God for forgiveness and mercy and emphasizes that only God's power can permit the magist to call spirits of his own. The magician does not immediately traffic directly with spirits, but seeks the permission and intercession of God to both call them up and ensure that they obey. The magist is keenly aware of the precarious nature of his control over the spirits and implores God to punish all those who refuse to do his bidding. Nearly all of the spells and incantations are larded with imprecations to recalcitrant spirits and appeals to God and angels to intercede so that they can be controlled. In short, these manuscripts prominently feature difficult and agnostic relationships with the spirit world and stress the intense efforts needed to conjure and control spirits, unquote, as well as the need to enlist God to help with this. Again, the magic does not come from the magician. It comes through God, allowing the magician to call forth these spirits and enforcing what the magician is asking with these spirits. And then the relationship between the magician and his spirits is a little adversarial and agnostic. And the magician has to be very clear in his instructions what he wants the spirits to do, so that they do not rebel. The magician is instructed that if faced with rebellious spirits, to, quote, escalate threats against the spirits, speaking in a louder and louder tone of voice and uttering increasingly threatening maledictions, unquote. So this parallels how Prospero deals with Ariel, where when Ariel, questions his authority, he threatens Ariel that he's going to put Ariel back into the tree, right?
Yeah.
And we also see this sort of grimoire magic referenced in Henry IV, Part 1, where the character of Owen Glendower claims to be able to call up spirits, and the character of Hotspur says, yeah, so can anybody, but, can you actually control them? So, the ability to, call up spirits can be done by anybody, but the power of actually getting them to come and do your bidding is different. And this also appears throughout other non-Shakespeare plays, this idea of calling spirits and them being adversarial and not necessarily willing to obey. So across early modern drama, Tribble notes that magic is approached with anger, fear, and anxiety, and the struggle to control the magic and the spirit world. And she notes that this is, quote, in keeping with recent research that has put the history of witchcraft and sorcery within the context of the history of emotions. Work on emotion and witchcraft has shown that female witches were often seen as suffering from unbridled passion, and that male magicians were also seen as emotionally out of control, albeit in the register of ambition and pride, rather than the resentment, greed, or lust commonly attributed with the witch, unquote. So just like we saw in witchcraft, where these are women who are not conforming, they're not conforming emotionally, the same is true for men practicing magic. More evidence that Prospero is using grimoire-based magic when he talks about his studies in Milan. He talks about how much study he was doing, how he went to study this really hard thing. And increasing isolation is in keeping with what the grimoire says about keeping it secret. Again, the idea of this being work and something difficult is throughout the play of The Tempest. And Ariel talks about the work being toils. They talk about Prospero's entire plan being a project that they are working on, and it has many parts. And again, much like the grimoire has instructions for how to call forth spirits to do your bidding, Prospero performs his magic by proxy via Ariel and Ariel's secondary spirits. And in the grimoire tradition, this sort of magic by proxy is the dominant form of magic in the grimoires. It's not about casting spells, it is about, quote, summoning, commanding, placating, and orchestrating sometimes recalcitrant spirits, unquote. Tribble calls Prospero more of a project manager than a wizard.
Yeah.
Right? He's making sure that everything is happening within the time frame that he has set it up to. And a project can also be subject to failure, much like Prospero's magic can be. And the magic is not necessarily inherent to him, but it is part of his study and his apparatuses, which is, his staff, his gown or cloak. And then when he has spirits, Ariel and the other spirits, when he calls them forth. Another thing that shows up in The Tempest that comes from grimoires is the importance of timing. As we know, as we've discussed, Prospero's project does not happen unless the perfect time and place happen, which is the Tempest, the titular role does not happen unless by happenstance the nobles are within a certain distance, are traveling within a certain distance of this island. And the grimoires really do put a lot of importance on precise timing so that there can be astrological and meteorological alignment and acting quickly once that moment is at hand, to make sure that everything is in alignment. There's all these different elements. You have to have done the work ahead of time. You have to have the time and place have to be absolutely correct. And then you have to achieve this like incredibly focused concentration to be able to perform spells. So something that is interesting to note about the mask is that it happens very quickly in comparison to, some of the other like moments of magic that happen on stage where we've seen somebody go off stage and like maybe have that time to prepare. But the mask has only 20 lines before Prospero re-enters with Ferdinand and Miranda, and Ariel is only given about 7 lines off stage to prepare the big show, one of the biggest displays of magic that we get on stage outside of the storm.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens in a very short amount of time, how Shakespeare has written the scene. And it is an elaborate mask. We've talked about there are a lot of spirits that are called forth to do this. There's a bunch of extras besides Ariel. And then it dissolves when Prospero is startled, and Tribble examines the startled reaction and the idea of starting and what that is. That is this sort of like involuntary reaction to something unexpected. And we see it throughout. We see startled starts elsewhere in Shakespeare. The ghost of Hamlet's father is noted to start when the cock crows in Act 1, Scene 1. He's about to, Horatio says he's about to speak and then is startled by the cock crowing. And early modern drama in a few other places conflates or meshes the idea of starting with the idea of sort of crossing a barrier between worlds. The idea of it being sort of like part of the sleep-wake transition, or being occupied with a task and then being taken out of that state into a different state.
Mm-hmm.
And Tribble argues that the start happens because Prospero is absorbed in the magic, and we see other evidence for him having to concentrate really hard to keep this mask happening, in how he asks for Ferdinand to please be quiet multiple times. And then it's suggested that the mask dissolves because Prospero has been startled. And Tribble notes that whether or not in production Prospero is startled because of the threat of Caliban being very real, or even if the threat is not such a big threat and it's just something that he's like forgotten about that does in a way threaten the big project overall.
Mm-hmm.
Like it does break Prospero's concentration when he remembers that he's got this thing that he wasn't expecting to have to deal with, whether that threat is serious or not. So then Tribble notes that as we get to the end of the play, Prospero completes his project and renounces his magical powers in what she calls, quote, less of a moment of conversion than an admission of the costs of magic and his inability to sustain its demands, unquote. The only time we really truly see Prospero do some sort of ritual motion is when he constructs a magic circle as he prepares to renounce his powers. And Tribble notes that, quote, in the final moments of the Tempest, Shakespeare has it both ways. The most powerful and familiar conjuring practice takes place as Prospero renounces his art, conjuring while abjuring. Moreover, the grammar of Prospero's conjuration renunciation is strangely ambiguous. Grimoires are written in the imperative mode, such that the most common form of address in the conjurations is invocation and command, plus command or malediction, unquote. But Prospero commands them to do all of the spirits that he talks to do nothing. And the invocation ceases with a caesura in the line, quote, by my so potent art, but this rough magic I here abjure, unquote. This leaves the claims to power incomplete. He just leaves it. And then when he has no more spirits to enforce, he turns to the audience and asks them to do the same thing, to release him. And according to Tribble, quote, reminds the playgoers of the tense relationship between enchantment and entrapment that characterizes his magical practice, unquote, the grimoire magical practice. So that is Prospero's magical practice through the lens of looking at the early modern and late medieval grimoire-based magical practices that were happening in England.
I think that's really interesting because, like, we've talked about Prospero's magic being different than the witches, different than the magic that's ascribed to women in this time period.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to track it down to manuscripts that we have evidence of, like manuscripts that still exist that were passed down, and being able to connect that to Prospero and how he performs magic is super eye-opening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my reading is related to yours, but a little bit different. So I got my reading from an article, My Charms Crack Not, The Alchemical Structure of the Tempest by Peggy Munoz Simmons. And Munoz Simmons acknowledges Prospero is a magician, right? Like, he is a magician through and through. But my reading additionally looks at the Tempest as a theatrical exercise in alchemical transmutation. So Prospero is not just a magician, but he's also an alchemist, which also was a popular type of science art during Shakespeare's time. Not unlike being a magician, just a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna yes and to your grimoire research and share with you all the alchemy that Prospero may also be practicing. And then I guess it's not just him practicing it, but also how Shakespeare used alchemy to inform his dramatic structure of the play. And so during this time period, there were a lot of famous Renaissance magicians that practiced alchemy as part of their repertoire. And so some of those are Cornelius Agrippa.
Oh, okay. My reading also mentioned Agrippa.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of overlap, okay. I think, in this. Yeah, there are things that you were saying that I was like, oh, I read about this too. I read about something too. Yeah. Additionally, there's an Italian magician, alchemist, Giambattista della Porta of Naples. And then John Dee was also a magician who practiced alchemy.
John Dee also had some grimoire.
Huh.
Yeah. So I also read a little bit about how he practiced magic. My reading noted that he was known for scrying, like using a stone to tell the future and things like that. And so his magic, my reading just noted the idea of like this intermediary. When I was talking about like the intermediaries, like John Dee was also known to use this intermediary. He didn't perform some of the magic himself. He like had other people scry for him and try and conjure for him. Yeah.
Interesting.
Go on.
Yes. Yeah, he was really interested in this topic, and alchemy was one of them as well. And so, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, alchemy is, quote, the branch of study and magical craft in the medieval and early Renaissance period concerned with the nature and transformation of physical substances, especially of base metal into gold, unquote. So, like, that's the kind of, like, base level alchemy. Also a character that you can play in D&D is an alchemist. I'm playing an alchemist myself, and I don't know how to play an alchemist, and I'm hoping that I have learned something and I can bring it into my campaign. Anyways.
This is all self-serving.
This is so self-serving. Yeah, this is self-serving research. So that's like the base of what alchemy is. Munoz Simmons writes that many scholars have noted that Shakespeare's audiences probably knew alchemical language as well as, or better than we in the humanities today, understand the language of modern physics and chemistry. And this is because Renaissance books were full of intellectual discourse of secrets and alchemy, and alchemy often served as a familiar poetic metaphor in Renaissance books. And alchemists had two types of what are called opus magnums, or significant achievements, in alchemy. One of them is the exoteric, or the useful science concerned with the physical transmutation of inferior metals into more precious ones.
And that's exoteric, right? With an X?
X, okay. Yeah, with an X. X as in xylophone. And then the second one is esoteric, or philosophical alchemy, that sought knowledge of God's creation and tried to improve the spiritual condition, as well as attempting to cure man's bodily ills. So those are the two different kinds of alchemy that were written about / practiced. And there were also two types of alchemists during this time period. One of them was the false alchemist, who knows nothing of the art and robs his clients of their gold. And then the second is the true alchemist, who seeks for the elixir or a universal panacea for human ills, and does not charge anything for his precious medicine. For true alchemists, the goal of alchemy was the renewal of time and the restoration of a regenerated or reformed humanity to the classical golden age or the biblical Eden. So, for example, like you might be searching for the philosopher's stone for metals or the elixir of life for humans.
Okay.
And therefore, alchemy had important political adherents who proposed utopias based on the ideals of the Golden Age. And so, like, this language about alchemy was popular for writing about seeking this age, this golden age of humanity and utopias. And Sir Walter Raleigh was also an alchemist who wrote about, like, utopia. And this was popular discourse during Shakespeare's time. And it also was placed on early modern stages. So Ben Jonson's play, The Alchemist, is a theatrical satire on false alchemists or con men, and this play was performed by Shakespeare's company within the same year as The Tempest.
Oh.
Yeah. And Munoz Simmons writes that this suggests that, one, quote, there was a considerable local interest in the subject of transmutation, and two, still a quote, that Shakespeare's virtuous Prospero, whose name literally means successful, might be an answer to Jonson's fraudulent subject as the portrait of a true alchemist who is successful both in realizing personal perfection and in restoring the golden age, unquote. So in this paper, Munoz Simmons argues that Prospero the magician alchemist's goal is, quote, to restore the golden age, or, in terms of the future, to create a brave new world by perfecting the people, including himself, who will live in it, and that the art or science of alchemy thus provides a major shaping pattern for the tragicomedy as a whole, unquote. And interestingly, John S. Mebane observed that the title, The Tempest, is the alchemical term for the boiling process, which removes impurities from base metal and facilitates its transmutation into gold. Hi, listeners. It's Editing Kourtney here. I am interrupting recording Kourtney and recording Elyse because I want to first give a little bit more context to this alchemical process than I provided during my original recording with Elyse. Okay, so we're talking about alchemy, we're talking about transmutation, and in order for an alchemist to transmute a base metal into gold, the alchemist would, in their alchemist's lab, use an alembic, which is an alchemical still, which consists of vessels connected by a tube, and it's used for distillation of liquid. So it's kind of like an alchemist's cup or beaker. And in order to transmute base metals into gold, the alchemist would take that base metal, put it inside the alembic, that alchemical still, and through a combination of other sorts of elements like water, salt, mercury, sulfur, the alchemist would then boil the base metal and put it through a few more stages in this alchemical process. And at the end of the alchemical process, the base metal will, through alchemy, transmute into gold. Or at least that's what alchemists were writing about in their manuscripts. So that is an alembic, and that is one of the processes that alchemists would use in order to complete the transmutation process of turning a base metal into a gold. Okay, now that that's settled, I'm going to go ahead and turn you back to recording Kourtney and recording Elyse.
Okay. So, which, like, I guess you can see in the play of, like, Prospero's project is to get these other humans to admit to some of their baser past choices so that then they can get this sort of, like, gold, this more pure state before he reveals himself to them.
Yeah, that's essentially like the...
Did I skip ahead?
You did, but luckily there's like, it's not just about the ending, right? It's about the journey.
Yes.
Not the destination. So Shakespeare embeds 9 stages of the alchemical process within the action of his play. So first, there's the separation, or divisio. Second, marination, or salsatura. 3, negrito, or putrefaction and distraction. 4, dissolution and condensation, or the solve et coagula. Number 5, the women washing sheets and dyeing process. 6, the cauda pavonis, or the peacock's tail. 7, the conjunctio or the chemical wedding. 8, squaring the circle. 9, the albedo or dawning. And 10, finally, the achievement of the philosopher's stone or perfection. And I want to note too that there's this fermentation that occurs in the subplot with Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo.
I have been in such a pickle.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. But I don't have space in my presentation for that, so maybe I will put it on Patreon as bonus content or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But just that's a note that there is additional alchemy in the subplot.
Yeah.
Also, there's a lot of links to Christianity that Munoz-Simmons noted, but I also didn't have space for that in my presentation. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I can add that to Patreon or go read the article. It's a great article with lots of fantastic illustrations and pictures of manuscripts.
Yeah. I just want to note something that is really interesting is that both the alchemical analysis and the grimoire analysis note that these practices, these that we associate with magic, are not non-Christian. For early moderns, they are linked to religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the exact opposite of witchcraft from Macbeth. These steps are performed on stage both linguistically and then also through theatrical imitation. So I'm going to walk us through those steps. And the first step is separation, which the Swiss alchemist Paracelsus called magic. And so the separation starts out in 1-1. The ship splits, it separates, and the mariners repeat, we split, we split. They repeat it consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ariel also describes the shipwreck scene, quote, sometime I'll divide and burn in many places, unquote. And Ariel's speech about the wreck includes an obvious reference to alchemy, obvious to our scholar here, I had no idea, but an obvious reference to alchemy with the fire, water, boiling of the waters, and sulfur. These are like references that Ariel uses in describing the shipwreck. And this allusion recalls how storms were caused in the alembic, which is an alchemical still. And in this process, this first stage, you apply fire to the mixture of sulfur, mercury, and salt with the metal to be transmuted. And then also in that first stage with the separation through applying fire, all of these elements break down and then ooze. In the alembic, they end up being like this ooze or mud kind of texture. And in Shakespeare's time, the human skull was often likened to an alembic within which brains could be boiled by heat or drunkenness. And so in the first step, when you're applying the heat and things are separating and becoming oozy, there's this also idea that the human brain could also do the same thing that an alembic did. A human skull can also be considered an alembic, not just the alembic vessel in the alchemist's lab.
The brain can also be a place where alchemy is happening, yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, that's that first step with applying fire and things breaking down, separating, and then becoming this ooze. The second stage that Munoz-Simmons notes is the stage of salsatura or marination, which is indicated by a reference to the salt baths in alchemy. So in the Tempest, the king, his son, and the courtiers are forced to swim through the salt sea to the shore after the shipwreck. So this salt bath. According to the Turba Philosophorum, which was included in a 1593 collection of alchemical texts, vessels that are being transmuted should be immersed in salt water.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And in the Tempest, the king, his son, and the courtiers are forced to swim through the salt sea to the shore after the shipwreck. And then third, Ferdinand and Alonso suffer through negredo, or an apparent death through drowning. So negredo, when practiced in the alembic of the human skull, is a period of death and mourning for the old self that results chemically from the mixing of mercury and sulfur and turns the metallic substance in the actual glass or the ceramic vessel to black. And Prospero boils the brains of the court party within their skulls in order to mortify and putrefy them in preparation for their regeneration into human perfection. During the illusory banquet, the party, their brains are affected by Prospero's alchemical magic.
In the transition between old self and new self, their brains are literally boiled.
Yeah.
Or metaphorically by what they are seeing and the tortures that they believe that they are under. Yeah.
And then the fourth alchemical process that shapes the structure of the play is dissolution and condensation. And during the period of madness where like the court's brains have boiled in that human skull alembic, the court is going through a madness. And during this period of madness, the court party is, Munoz Simmons assumes, repeatedly dissolved, evaporated, and condensed into dew. And Ariel references fetching dew in 1-2, and dew and rain were synonyms for the healing aspect of mercurial water, which transformed the black negrito from that previous step into the white albedo through the washing of dead bodies and matter that could be animated.
Oh, that just, I also just like flashed to like Hamlet when his first soliloquy, when he says, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew." And I was like, oh, elsewhere too.
Yeah, I thought that too. And I'm like, okay, well, where's alchemy in Hamlet? Yeah, especially like a regeneration kind of idea. Yeah. And then the next step in the Tempest's alchemical process is the women washing sheets. And there are repeated references in the play to calcination, or what's called the women washing sheets stage of this alchemical process. So women washing sheets is the long cooking stage in alchemy where the prime matter must be cleansed through calcination, and that this cooking or woman's work makes the prime matter ready for its new form. So remember in the first step, the separation with the alembic, there has to be like a vessel, something inside the alembic, and that is going through this transmutation phase of separating and then marinating and then putrefaction and dissolving. And by the time we get to this woman's washing sheets stage, it's time to like cleanse the item in the alembic. And Ariel assures Prospero that the shipwrecked party's garments were, quote, fresher than before, unquote. And Gonzalo observes the renewal and dye of garments of the party. So the clothes of the court are washed and newly dyed by Prospero and Ariel, and they're in better condition, or in as good of condition as when they left Tunis and got shipwrecked.
Yeah.
So the clothes have been cleaned and dyed. And then the next step in this Tempest alchemical process is cauda pavonis, or the peacock's tail, which indicates that the alchemist's work is almost complete. And Prospero's wedding mask for Miranda and Ferdinand visually dramatizes this turn from the blackness, the negrito, in that previous step where everything's melting, boiling, breaking down, by using the theatrical descent of the goddess Iris, who displays her colors of the rainbow and then is joined by Juno and her chariot drawn by peacocks.
Whoa.
And during this mask, this wedding mask, Juno and Ceres then sing a pastoral blessing promising the return of the golden age with perpetual spring and summertime. So as the court has, with their alchemical brain, boiled, broken down, been cleansed, it's now we're now heading towards the golden age with this purification. The seventh step in the alchemical process is conjunctio, or the chemical wedding. And in the play, this is really like a preview, since Miranda and Ferdinand are betrothed, but they don't marry until they return to Italy. But in this stage in the alchemical process, it is like the joining of opposites. In the marriage of Miranda and Ferdinand, that's the opposites of man and woman. That is the ideal of a Renaissance tragicomedy. And then also, like you mentioned, Prospero abruptly ending the wedding mask. Prospero says that the revels end and his actors are melted into air. And in the alchemical process, this would be like they are distilled in the alembic from a liquid into a gas, and they evaporate into thin air. And then at this point, as you mentioned, Prospero's project is coming to a head. And when Prospero is mentioning that his project is almost about to end, he says that his charms crack not. And there is alchemical importance of the key word crack, which often happen to alembics placed over too high a heat. So it's like you're mentioning timing. Prospero is mentioning in the alchemical sense that, okay, like the project's coming to an end and I'm not going to boil this too long. We've got to, yeah,
all of the instruments that I was talking about, like everything's in place, everything's going to work as expected. It
yes,
won't, like you said, crack.
yeah, the timing is working out. The time is ripe. And so the eighth stage is to square the circle. And Prospero traces out a magic circle with his staff, and he delivers his speech about elves and hills and brooks and all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. And this speech resembles Medea's speech in Book 7 of Metamorphoses. And Medea was an alchemist, a very famous, probably the OG alchemist.
My reading also talked about Medea,
Yeah.
and depictions of her witchcraft also align with like
Hmm.
grimoire type of witchcraft. Yeah.
Hmm. And so then in this speech, Prospero also promises to abjure his rough magic, and he buries his magic staff and drowns his book. And this likely arrives from Agrippa's ironic book, The Vanity of the Arts and Sciences, which attacks magicians, creating illusions, and it also attacks false alchemists. So most early scientists, as you said, abjured magic, especially necromancy, because it involved black magic and dealings with otherworldly spirits. And so here, Prospero might be endangering his soul as an alchemist with a quote unquote demonic helper, Ariel. So
Mm.
he's at the point where it's like, I have to save myself. And what you mentioned before about
Yeah.
like there being a limit to the kind of magic you can do.
Yeah, and that it takes a toll. Like there's also in my reading they talked about like the physical toll that it takes to do this work is too much to be able to
Yeah.
do anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. And Prospero does mention like how he's aging and he's getting older.
Right.
Yeah. And so in the squaring of the circle, this step points to the end of the opus magnum. And during this stage, Prospero calls for music to cure the court party who had their, who were boiled in their brains. And music was often used in alchemy to calm the alchemist in his laboratory, possibly for Prospero, his cave laboratory. And interestingly, too, alchemy is a musical art and it relies on time and measure, and music relies on time and measure. And then once he has squared the circle, the ninth step is the albedo or dawning. And this is Prospero's final step before his final achievement of the Philosopher's Stone. The albedo is when darkness is followed by light and black by white. So, like I mentioned, that step 3, the negrito, where the human skull alembic boils, all of the brains and everything melts down.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It gets purified and cleaned. And by this final step, this albedo, there's been a transmutation from darkness to light. And Prospero says, the charm dissolves apace, and as the morning steals upon the night, melting the darkness, so their rising senses begin to chase the ignorant fumes that mantle their clearer reason. So in this final scene, Prospero uses his own nobler reason, and he allows reason to return to the court party. In the end, Prospero's opus magnum has preserved the ship and all its crew. It has restored the reborn alchemical king, so Alonso, in a purified form. Also, it's perfected Antonio and Sebastian, and it's also gently led Ferdinand and Miranda to their soon-to-be chemical wedding. And then last, he has also regained his own lost dukedom and a second chance at good government. So in this way, through the alchemical process, Prospero has successfully transmuted the island and the people on the island and brought them to a golden age. I mentioned at the top of the episode that, or at the top of my section, that alchemy involves transmuting baser metals into gold.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the play, Gonzalo announces the golden ending to the story. He wishes upon the couple a blessed crown of gold, and that the tale be written down, quote, with gold on lasting pillars, unquote.
Wow.
Yeah. So to conclude, Prospero as this magician alchemist and Shakespeare as this dramatist uses, or it can be seen that he uses the alchemical process to transmute the characters in the play with all of their flaws and all of their bad,
Mm-hmm,
behavior
mm-hmm.
from the past and repurify them into something light and gold. And then they move forward into a brave new world, a golden age, a kind of Eden. And that's my reading.
Wow.
And yeah.
I love they don't contradict each other. What I love about the look at the alchemy process structure as like structure for Prospero's project or for the play itself ties back to Prospero's past of the study that he's been undergoing, as does the grimoire magic and what Prospero has been so involved in since being ousted from his dukedom, and how he's learned to have more power and his search for power, and but it's also like taking a toll on him, and they both can exist in an interpretation of the Tempest, a reading or production of the Tempest.
Yeah. Last thing I have to say before we wrap up, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but I think that it's so fascinating the way that Prospero's magic is like informed by magical, whether they actually happened or not, but like the practices of the real powerful people that lived in Shakespeare's time. And it's not just like, you're a wizard, Harry. I know that J.K. Rowling has been canceled, but
yeah, Shakespeare's not inventing a magic system. He's taking from existing cultural ideas surrounding how magic or alchemy work that already exist in culture. This is just all over the early modern stage. Plays that deal with alchemy, plays that deal with grimoire-based magic.
Yeah.
Around the time that the Tempest is being performed. It's also fascinating how in the time between Macbeth and the Tempest, the commentary on that's also something to account for, is that like the ideas surrounding magic and alchemy, there's a few years of cultural difference potentially, from it being magic being dark, evil, this thing women do in secret, to being like, no, it's something that like is difficult and can be respected but not inherently evil, is an interesting like thing to also track for the time period.
Yeah. The drama is responding to this intellectual discourse about magic practices that were happening in powerful circles. Square the circle.
Great. I have nothing to add to that. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on your favorite podcast app.
I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Neverending Minute by Sounds Like Sander.
If you would like to support us, visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. You can also hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it. For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, or follow us on Instagram at ShakespeareAnyonePod.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here is a completely random Shakespeare quote for you.
From The Winter's Tale, Act 4, Scene 4. Said by Clown. She hath made me 24 nosegays for the shearers, 3-man songmen all, and very good ones, but they are most of them means and bases, but one Puritan among them, and he sings psalms to hornpipes.